So basically, to get us started, the first thing I want to hear out of you is how would you describe the premium format at this moment in time, and then how would you describe it overall?
That's a little bit of a difficult question because,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, I have very mixed opinions depending on which portion of the format we're looking at. Even
Okay.
in the current state of the format, I'd have to say, like, there are decks that I very much feel are toxic and very anti-fun that I don't think should be in the format in their current state. But then there are also decks that I think maybe need a little tweaking, but beyond that are very fun, and I'm glad to see them being tier 1. Things like Nubatama, I know they're more of tier 2, but
Mm-hmm.
Nubatama, Grand Blue, Neos, I think are fine, versus I think things like DI needs to be taken down,
Mm-hmm.
not entirely, but at least a notch. Riviere can definitely hurt to play against and just feel like I lost to something I can't stop.
Mm-hmm.
And Ezel is 50-50 on that one.
Yep.
So it really depends on what part of the format you're looking at. But it's either really fun or really toxic. There's no in between for me.
So you'd say like this format right now is that so your description of the current format at this current state would be either really fun or really toxic, no in between.
Fully depending on the matchup, yes.
Okay. So what about overall? Like since premium, so premium for clarity of definition, premium is everything after VBT01. That's premium.
Yes, yes.
G era and premium are two different
from
things.
From the reboot forward, I'm aware. Yes.
So what would you say if you were to describe the entire premium format that we've had so far? What would you say? If someone were to ask you, what's premium been like since it came out? What would you say?
Death Anchor and Excel 2 are a mistake.
Death Anchor and Excel 2. Okay, that's fair enough.
Just because historically they've both actually like really done a lot of damage, but
Mhm.
I think overall, like any format, of course, now that we're moving into year 3, Premium's had a lot of ups and downs, and at its highs, I think Premium has definitely been some of my favorite Vanguard experiences I've had ever.
Okay.
You know, I know I talk about it a lot in whenever I'm playing, but specifically the Neos versus Nubatama matchup in Premium, the way that's been since Premium Collection dropped has just, it's my favorite matchup I have in Vanguard history.
Okay.
Like, and then there are also though times where I feel like the meta just gets really stale, or we start teetering on tier 0 decks, and it's just like.
Sorry, go on.
It's just I don't have a general consensus because it spikes so hard in both directions. So I think overall it's definitely enjoyable because even in those really bad spikes of just it being not fun at all, you can just not play the meta and you have probably thousands of cards to work with, right? And there's so much fun stuff you can do that if the meta's bad, I just take the Yu-Gi-Oh approach and say, fuck it, I'm playing Metalborgs, I'm playing Infinite. You know, these decks that I can just do the most random shit with. So, it's been fun, nonstop, at least at somewhere in the format.
Okay. So then the next few questions I'm going to ask, like I'm going somewhere with all these questions. I asked you the first 2 questions. Eventually I'm going to ask like 3 more, and then they're all going to come together into one final point. So my next question to you is asking, for standard, with every set release, does the meta most set releases, does the meta dramatically change, yes or no? With most set releases for standard, does the meta dramatically change? Like now there's a new tier 1 deck, or something that was tier 1 before is now tier 7.
This is very difficult for me to answer because there have been times when the meta changes very slightly over the course of. So I'm going to kind of give a long-winded, complicated answer, and I do apologize for that.
But that's fine. You have 10 minutes.
up until the release of AL4, we saw the meta gradually making slow shifts where Kagero and OTT were still unquestionably the top 2 decks in the format, but we started seeing more and more things that either worked into them or at least could go even against those 2. So you at least stood a chance if you had a little bit of decent luck. And then also, some of those counters to OTT and Kagero had an even tougher time with Nova Grappler than OTT itself did. So the meta didn't really develop a whole lot. It did stay solved. OTT was best second format, Kagero was second, but the 2 extra boosters that followed Q4 made minor changes. AL4, Ultra Rare, both complete overhauls to the meta. The meta completely shaped itself around those sets in its entirety. Zanbaku, PBD, Ezel, in my opinion, along with plant tokens and Metatron, just completely game changed everything in the meta.
Mm-hmm.
From there, yeah, every set for the rest of year 1, which is everything pre-Heroic Evolution, every set for the rest of year 1 either had a major meta shift in it or set up for a major meta shift. The setup set being the Brant set, which brought us the preparation for Beast Deities and Overlord to go on their rise.
Okay.
Going into year 2, we saw the release of Heroic, which wasn't a huge shift, but it did bring us what I would consider the first true high roll deck of the standard meta, and we've had one in the meta every set, like every meta since then. We've had one that I would consider at least tier 2.
Mm-hmm.
Messiah actually did a really good job at, being something that brought us a bit more of not Excel, but Excel's style back in, and I think that was good, but not major top-end meta shifts. The mid-end of the meta changed a lot with the early sets in year 2. The first big thing in year 2 was Phantasmal, which literally, if you're not Gauntlet Buster Dragon, you drop to tier 3. Everything dropped to tier 3. The only reason that Gauntlet is the only deck that survived is because we saw Hyuga, a very strong but rearguard reliant Excel deck, take its place at the top of the deck, or at the top of the tier list, and we also saw Melody get hit.
Mm-hmm.
So the only other deck that would have survived Phantasmal's release just died. Following that, we didn't really see anything happen with the Shin stuff other than Godhand being the new high roll deck. And then since then, every set has been major. Pretty much every set since then has shaken up either the middle or the top 3 of the meta.
Okay.
And so
you basically you said exactly what you've said. Perfect. So you would say the answer to my question is the meta did not change earlier in the game, but the more deeper into standard we've gone, every set has been a game changer in some way.
Yes, but it doesn't always shake up the very top of the meta.
Okay, that's all I needed to hear. That's perfect. Okay. So then my question to you would be, once the meta started becoming, once we started getting those sets, and you actually said this earlier, but I'm gonna have you re-say it just to make sure we're on the same page. Once we got to the sets like Phantasmal and the other middle of year 2, somewhat start of year 3 sets for standard, would you say that going first is the way to play standard?
I would say that
since Excel 2, let's actually define it even further. Since Excel 2,
okay,
would you say that going
2,
first is the...
So you're saying year 2 as a whole?
Since Excel 2, would you say that going first is the optimal way to play in standard?
Going first has always been preferred in standard because going first in standard has always been very, very... Going first in standard was unquestionably too good for the longest time. They are taking measures to make decks, really weak going first, really strong going second. They're taking measures to make decks at least work going second if they struggle going second before. Mm-hmm. So, I think with the way gifts are and standard as a whole, we're never going to see going second be preferred as a general thing. We're only going to see certain decks want it.
Okay.
But going first is less powerful as time goes on, for the most part. Excel decks will probably always want to go first, though.
Okay, so then we're gonna then here's my next question. Then in premium, would you say that it's the same case?
Kind of.
Explain. I'm actually gonna stop the timer because we're not gonna have enough time to hear your explanation. So we'll just say that after this question, 10 minutes are up and it's your turn.
So this is the last answer I'm giving for this stuff?
Yeah. So this is basically to set the groundwork. This is to set the groundwork. Okay. My point will be made clear as we go on, but this is to set the groundwork. So once you answer this question, you're free to take the stage, and I'm going to answer your questions. So answer this.
Okay.
Would you say
So-
that going first is the same amount of impact in premium as it is in standard, and why?
For the same reasons that I think they're attempting to make it move towards in standard, it really depends on what you're playing and what you're playing against, what you'd rather do.
Okay.
There are matchups where playing any given deck, I may want to go first or second. You know, if I'm playing against something that doesn't have a strong grade 2 game and I have a solid one, I'm going to want to go second because that makes me more likely to hit the first stride in that scenario, or to just at least be in a better spot when it comes to the grade 2 gaming.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are also times where if both decks have a really strong grade 2 game, I want to be hitting mine first and then contesting for that first stride. And worst case scenario, if I have to ride up, I know that I've at least done a lot of damage on the way, either to their hand or their actual damage zone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as simple
Mm-hmm.
in Premium, which is very true to form for the format. And it's not a yes or no question for Premium. It really depends on what you're playing with and what you're playing against. What's better?
So then I
eyes.
guess we could reword the question to this. Do you think the stride mechanic makes going second at least viable in Premium? Do you think the stride mechanic and the grade 2 game as a whole makes going second and the game to get to that point a lot more fair than in standard? Because in standard, as far as I've heard, it's if I go first, I'm more set up to win, and there's nothing you can do about it because it's not like you can grade 2 game me. I'm hitting 3 anyway.
If Robyn goes first, you're going to win 9 out of 10 games into every matchup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In standard.
Yep.
So, striding is definitely on paper a way to help that. The issue is the meta and its ability to grade 2 game can just easily negate that. But decks with weaker grade 2 game can definitely benefit. Nubatama's a huge one. They don't have the strongest grade 2 game, but they don't care much for giving up first stride or whatever, or if they can first stride. Like, they don't care either way.
Okay.
So, and they also don't care if they hit grade 3 first. Nubas just do whatever. Neos can pretty much do whatever. But then there are decks that it's just like, it just feels the same-ish, kind of.
Okay. Well, that's it for my questions for now. I do have some more questions because you've given me a lot of information to work with. So I'm going to pass the floor to you, set the timer for 10 minutes, and say go.
I think the first thing I want to ask is, why do you prefer Premium over Standard?
Okay. The very simple answer to that is as follows. There are several reasons, so I'm going to kind of summarize them, and if you want more detail, you can ask. The first reason is, as I've asked you, I think the stride mechanic as a whole, it adds a whole new dimension to the game. So if you go first, you get your gift markers, you get the ability to rush while you're on 3 and they're on 2, or if you're Ezel, for example, you get to be on 3 while they're on 1. So going first has its benefits, but going second also has its benefits, and I feel that with the advent of standard cards, G-Era brought us a lot of really good pieces for going second. That being the GB cards, the stride mechanic, a lot of things good for going second. V is very good at giving us cards for going first. And since we have both of those in the same format, I feel like going first and second is balanced. Not that every deck can go first and not that every deck can go second, but there's an even number of decks that like going first and even number that like going second, even number that can go do both. For example, Aquaforce in Premium right now, I won a shop challenge with Robyn where the entire thing was I just high roll and win. I was basically playing Standard Plus. But it's because I went first that I won all my games. If I had gone second in any of my games, I probably wouldn't have won all those. But I think actually to go second one game and someone tried to grade 2 game me, but that's besides the point. The point is, that I'm trying to make is that I feel like the stride mechanic really makes going second and first more balanced, whereas every game I've played in Standard, oh, you went first? Oh, I guess I die. Oh, I went second. All right, game 2? Oh, wait, there is no game 2 because Bushy Road hates 2 out of 3 for some reason. The second reason is the bigger pool of cards allows for more creative deck building. 90% of the time, there are things like Ezel where the build is just super straightforward. You play 4 of this, 4 of this, 4 of this, 4 of this. Anything that's Standard Plus, you're basically playing a Standard deck, which, by the way, is always objective on how it's supposed to be built, in my opinion, at the very least. I feel like there's a lot more creative deck building when it comes to Premium. And the third reason is that even if there are really broken things, there are ways to play around it. Damage denying and grade 2 game are my examples. You basically, those are built-in game mechanics that every deck can use to play around certain broken things. This isn't like, oh, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you have to just draw your Ash Blossom and now you've outed their combo. You can actually play around their moves in any deck, because damage denying and grade 2 gaming are universal mechanics in the game. So I feel like those 3 reasons are why I prefer Premium. Standard is just Vanguard, but without the 3 things I just mentioned, and why would I want to play something that's less when I can have more?
I'm trying to think of how to word this. Is that your whole answer?
That's my whole answer.
Okay. I'm trying to think of how to word this next question. Mine are going to seem a little all over the place, and that's just because I just want to kind of get a feel for... Because that kind of basically got me on the page that I want to be on with that entire concept. So I guess now I'm going to go into things that are more like personal to me. If in both formats, you could remove 1 card each, and it can be a standard card from Premium.
Okay.
If you can remove 1 card from each format, you have to pick 1 each.
Okay.
For the sake of overall game health.
Yep.
Which cards would you delete?
Okay, so for Premium, I already have my answer. NLK. Or Gastille. One of those 2. I'm probably going to go with Gastille because I feel like NLK gives Dark Irregulars something to do. But even if you got rid of NLK, Gastille can still be really broken with Brufus and Mofi. Like, those 2 cards, you don't need NLK to make Gastille good. You just don't. Gastille can be deleted, and I would actually have no problem with it. Even though I can play around those, and I can play around Dark Irregulars, and it's easy to win against Dark Irregulars, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna have any fun, but that's a story for another time. In Standard, I have no bloody idea, because I don't play as much, but if I had to pick one, I would probably say Vanquisher? Because that's a deck that can go both first and second, and I don't think Narukami was really struggling because they had Gauntlet Buster before, and I don't really think that they would be struggling if they had Gauntlet Buster. I feel like Vanquisher is a fun card to play with, but it put Narukami in a position where they're just going to be good for the rest of time because defensive triggers mean nothing against them. They literally have front trigger active every turn, and if you play fronts, it just gets worse. But again, Standard is not my forte. There's probably a different, better answer. I don't play a lot, but if I had to choose one on a surface level observation, I would choose Vanquisher.
Okay. I'm glad you kind of, took the implied why at the end of my question as well and explained yourself. So
no.
Thank you very much for that. I'm trying to think of another question because I had one and then I lost it, so I apologize for that.
Yep, take your time.
What would you say is the... How do I word this? What would you say is the best way to... if you wanted to play, like, both formats...
Okay.
What would you say is the best way to split your playtime between them for like different play styles? Like
this is actually a fantastic question because this kind of leads into an argument I was going to make later where I feel like people are angry because in Premium Bushiroad isn't really supporting G series decks, and I'm like, oh wow, I'm so angry that in G era they didn't support OG era decks all that much. Why would they? I'm angry that in G era they kept supporting Blue Art and they didn't support Revengers. But like it's always been that way. So I would say if I were to split my playtime, I would pick a V deck, play it in Standard, and then easily with the new Premium Collection 2 reveals, I feel like the meta is going to be shaken up a lot and that more decks are become viable. Like Narukami, viable deck in Premium now. But I would definitely pick up Narukami in Standard and then move it to Premium. Mainly because even without that G unit, I've been testing with Narukami a lot, and I feel like it's a very fun deck that if it goes first, does great things. If it goes second, it's got some plays. It's also very good at plussing. It's just got an all-around okay playstyle. But if I were to recommend someone wanting to play both formats, I would say pick up Narukami. You have a meta deck for Standard, and then once the Premium Collection comes around, you'll have a pretty okay deck for Premium to kind of, test the waters, dip your toes in the pool, see how it feels. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say on that. That's my answer.
Okay. And then I guess I'm probably only going to ask one more question.
Sure.
Are there any decks And I am going to specifically ask about premium, but if you have anything to throw in for standard,
Yep.
Of course, feel free, go ahead.
Yep.
Are there any decks you feel are anti-fun?
Yes and no, and here's why. I'm really gonna cheat with this answer. Because there are decks that you would consider anti-fun, like Mega Colony and Chaos are anti-fun decks. But normally when I take a deck to an event, I'm normally bringing a deck that doesn't die to those anti-fun decks and has a plan. I would never. It's a good deck. I'm not gonna say I'm not saying it's a bad deck. It's a good deck. I would never take Grand Blue to an event. I would, in its current state, without the next stride, I would never take Grand Blue to a premium event. Because if I run into Mega Colony, instant loss. If I run into Chaos, instant loss. The whole point about me and my playstyle is like, I like mitigating as many losses as possible. So I'm going to take something to an event that can sort of play around, like Luard can play around Mega Colony. It just has a really hard time doing it. It just doesn't like doing it. So that's why I took Luard to BCS Chicago. I will say that it's not fun to play against them depending on my deck, but that's just how card games are. There are going to be shit matchups, and so I'm going to bring a deck to an event that has the least amount of shit matchups. Like I would if we had Team League this year, I would have been bringing Nubatama. Because I really like the deck, and I feel like it has a lot of really good matchups, and it can deal with a lot of stuff really easily. Overall, yes, there are unfun decks to play against, but with my playstyle, I never have no fun playing against them. Someone flips Mega Colony, I just go, oh, okay, I can handle this. It's not gonna be the most fun I've ever had, but it's also not gonna be boring and brainless. That's my answer on that.
Okay. I don't really have any more questions at the moment.
How much money? You had 42 seconds left. Perfect, actually.
Oh, okay. So I wouldn't. Yeah. So we're good then.
Okay. So I'm gonna start asking you questions again. I had a point where I was going before. All right. So going off of what I was saying before, basically, so you'd agree that the stride mechanic at the very least adds an incentive for going second.
Yes.
Okay. Do you? I know the answer to this, and I know the answer to this personally, but I want to hear you say it on video so that we can understand we're on the same page. Do you like the Grade 2 game?
Well, I mean, you know it. That doesn't mean everyone else.
Exactly. Do you like the Grade 2 game?
No.
Okay. Why?
Well, I shouldn't say no as a blanket statement, but I don't like it in the state that it's in currently.
Okay.
The idea of the Grade 2 game is honestly something that I am okay with. The idea of contesting for first stride. But I don't like that, and it's not even the Grade 2 game's fault.
Okay.
That I dislike it right now. The reason I dislike the Grade 2 game, the biggest reason is that most decks, especially coming off of the Grade 2 game, are going to consistently be able to kill first stride in this meta. And you have to either specifically be playing something that's built to give up first stride, or stride first, or you're losing most of your games.
Okay.
And I don't like... I know I kind of warned you I was going to be making comparisons to some metas you might not be familiar with.
No, go ahead.
If anyone watching this plays Rainbow Six Siege and you've ever been killed by a Blitz or a Ying, or even just while you're flashed, it's the same feeling. It's like, okay, so I did everything I could. I was in the best position I could put myself in, but there's nothing I could do because I didn't draw that one thing I needed to keep Grade 2 gaming, or I'm too high and I have to ride up and my opponent gets first stride and then I just die.
Okay. So this is actually where I'm going to stop asking questions and actually make a counterpoint here. So you say that you don't like the Grade 2 game because what if you can't continue Grade 2 gaming, you have to ride up? What if you can't do that? Well, that's where I would say the idea of planning ahead and seeing what you have in your hand and thinking, okay, I can either play it safe and damage starve them, or I can risk it on getting more pieces for the Grade 2 game and continue Grade 2 gaming. So for example, best example I can think of right now, Murakumo. If they get first stride, not even first, if they get to Grade 3 and they have a damage, they win at this point. So what can you do to counteract that? Well, that's very simple. Grade 2 gaming doesn't work against them, so the next best option is to damage starve them. Another deck I can think of, Luard. They're amazing, but their Grade 2 game is incredibly piece reliant, So if you look at what they have on the board and you think about what they might have in their hand, and then you play accordingly, it's very possible to out-resource a Luard player. If you're going first and your deck has a great rush on grade 3 and you can dwindle their hand size down to 1 or 2 cards, you are in a very good position against the Luard player. If the Luard player goes first, then that means that they might have to ride up to 3 if your grade 2 game is better than them. So there are ways to play around and plan ahead. So yes, you're right. If someone wasn't thinking about what they're doing, and if someone was just playing, I'm gonna risk it for a biscuit with no forward planning, like if they do that with no forward planning and no thinking about that at all, then yes, you're right. The grade 2 game is very uninteresting, boring, and can be defeating in most cases. But 99% of the time, you can plan around that if you know your matchup and if you're good at reading what cards the opponent has in their hand, which does make Premium very hard to access. It's very hard to access for new players because, again, you have to learn all these skills. Premium is definitely for players with the bigger galaxy brain or who are more experienced or who know the game mechanics better.
I see what you did there, and I raise you a thinking emoji.
But I don't think that just because the format requires a bigger brain, that means that the grade 2 game is unhealthy or bad or poorly designed per se. You know where I'm kind of coming from with this?
Well, like I said, I don't even think that my issues with the grade 2 game are the grade 2 game's fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's that first stride hinges so much on that, and whoever gets first stride is in such a massive advantage.
I think the only decks that really that no matter what their hand size and no matter what they have that get first stride instantly win are like DI, and that's it. Like the only deck Neo
after a decent grade 2 game, if Neo's first stride, you're dead.
Yeah, which is why you need to play around that and consider that. But DI is like the only deck I can think of that fits whatever you're describing. It's like where you can't play around it because you give them a single damage and they win, and they have Bobos. So it's like
yeah, if DI gets first stride, it doesn't matter if you gave them the damage. It matters if they have Bobo.
Yeah, no, like at that point, DI is the only deck I can think of that fits your description. Like everything else,
DI is by far the worst offender.
No, but I think I can give counterpoints and counter arguments to every single deck that you throw at me for this argument of, oh, if they get first stride after a good grade 2 game, they win. Like at that point, you lost the grade 2 game, but then why did you lose the grade 2 game? Was it because you risked it? Was it because you didn't have your pieces and you shotgunned it like an idiot? Was it because you just drew badly? That last one, it's Vanguard. It's not the most consistent card game ever. That's gonna happen in both formats, but it's definitely, I would think,
that's gonna happen in any card game.
No, but it's worse in Standard. I would say that the problem with not drawing well is worse in Standard, because like Tachikaze is a perfect example. If you draw Anger Blader and Sweeper, you win. Just straight up. There is no if and or buts about it. You win. It's better Mordred that can do it going first. Like there are no if and or buts about it. If you had those pieces, you won. In Vanquisher, if you have a Vanquisher and a Jaggy shot, you're most likely gonna win. Just one Jaggy shot does it. Because then
because that turns on your continuous.
Yeah, and then the rest of the cards in your deck also work off being bound from the hand. So it's like, I would say that Standard's a much bigger offender for what you're describing. I would say that Standard is definitely, if we're talking about purely on a tactical, being able to play around your opponent level, I'd say Standard, I think, is inferior. Which is what kind of where I was going with this, is that the whole idea of going first, plus the fact that the format's less consistent, plus the fact that there's no incentive to not immediately ride to grade 3, maybe in the rare cases of, oh my gosh, I'm playing against some 9-year-old with Gancelot. I better not ride to 3 or he's gonna win. Like, there are really rare cases, but 90% of the time, there's no incentive to not just shotgun it to 3. There's no skill in going first, riding Vanquisher, and winning. There's no skill in that. If you have your pieces, you win.
Stacking crits is the most skilled thing I've ever done.
And that's the other thing, is like, it's more RNG reliant, because triggers in Standard are way, way more impactful than they are in Premium, I'd say. Because in Premium, you have bigger guard numbers, and if my predictions are correct, we're going to be getting some really good stuff in Premium Collection to help with the whole issue. We're also getting 30k Sentinels with the critical mark. Like, defensive options in Premium are a lot bigger. Battledore effects really don't matter in Premium if you have that heal trigger. So in Standard, it's just screw you. I got a crit trigger. I got a front trigger. I got a trigger a general. I sacked a heal. Kill yourself. Like, I got this. There's nothing you can do. Vanquisher or Revan, if they have their pieces and go first, they are going to win. And that's been that way for 90% of the meta in Standard. I'd say the only deck that doesn't care if it goes first or second is maybe OTT. But that's because they can manipulate top decks. And they can manipulate the whole luck mechanic that every deck has to rely on. They have it confirmed every game. So I would say, and actually I'm going to ask you this as well, is Standard a bigger offender in all the problems, when it comes to all the issues that Premium has? Would you say that Standard has it worse? And why? With everything I just said.
It's difficult to compare them directly with some of the issues that I have, like first stride being so deadly as opposed to hitting grade 3 first being a pretty big advantage. But
in this case, you could say that going to grade 3 first and being more impactful is more cancerous than getting first stride and being more impactful, because the first stride, you can at least play around that. Can you play around someone riding to 3?
I mean,
even if the grade 2 game, let's say the grade 2 game,
cards that can take cards out of the opponent's hand.
Well, but let's just say that Premium was at this moment in its worst.
That was a joke.
Let's just say that at this moment Premium was in its worst condition. This is the worst meta. Everything sucks. Murakumo's tier 0. The timeline's messed up.
They unlimited assassin.
They unlimited, like, this is the worst. This is the worst format ever. This is the worst format ever. Everything's on fire. Would you say that still being able to play around first stride makes it more fair than Standard, where if I go first, I win? That's the timer. I'm gonna finish this question, and then
So in the current state of Standard, I would have to say no.
Okay.
There are actually more decks than seem to get credit that can afford to go second into most of the meta.
Okay. So name a few examples. Tell me why you think that is.
Melody is a deck that's usually able to go second and not just insta-die unless you're playing against Revan. And you're going to hear me say that a lot when I talk about this topic, because Revan's the worst offender, by far. Across both formats, Revan is the worst offender, by far, of this concept. Seconded by NLK.
Okay.
Well, Guest Steel, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The NLK deck.
Yep.
DI can afford to go second just because it's able to just make a big-ass wall, and it doesn't need to already have a decent hand size. You just need a couple cards to get that ball rolling. So as long as you're not into Revan or into a really high-rolly Vanquisher, you're usually somewhat set on going second without just instantly crumbling.
But would they still lose is the question.
It depends. It depends on what they draw. It depends on what they have.
If I had to ask you for a percentage, what would you say?
Into Revan, Vanquisher, or the rest of the meta?
Yes.
No. I'm saying, like, into which one?
Yes. No. Yes. Would you get? What percentage would you give for each one? Like Revan, 100% they lose, right? High rolly Vanquisher, what would you say?
If Revan goes first, the only things I'd say that have a half decent chance of clapping back at it are Valkyrian, Vanquisher, and Hyuga, and maybe Riviere.
Okay. All right. That answers my question. Then it's your turn on the floor. Let me turn on the timer. All right, timer's up.
Okay, give me a moment to think.
Sure.
Would you say that in Standard there are decks that get overlooked a lot, that might be better than people give them credit for, because people have this image of Standard that oversimplifies it?
No, and I can actually provide a reason why. So in Standard,
I would hope so.
Oh, of course, yeah. In Standard, so let's take one of the decks that you mentioned before, DI, for example. DI in Standard at the current moment is I ride Brufus, I put my things in Soul, I have 3 or more copies. I'm set to go. When I attack, I kill your dude. I get a crit. I have some protect markers. I got battle door times 3. What you gonna do, boy? But that's if that. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Brufus doesn't require your opponent to be at 3, do they? It just requires you to have 2 more grade 3s in Soul.
Yes, you have to have 2 or more grade 3s in Soul.
Okay, so going against DI, and the DI player goes first, it's very simple to play around them, because I can call nothing. And then you attack with Brufus, you ain't getting your crits, boy. You ain't getting your power, you can get some advantage and get your triple battle door, but it doesn't matter if I played around it. And then my turn comes, and I ride to 3, and let's say I'm playing Revan or Vanquisher, I then proceed to bend you over and rip your butthole so wide that I lost my comparison, and it probably was really disgusting. But the point is that they're dead. They're super dead. It's super easy to play around that. Going first with Brufus, I would think on a surface level, with no other added variables, because luck is always a variable, but it's very hard to control and very hard to talk about. But if triggers did not exist in the game, or there was no luck involved in this match, I would think on a surface level analysis, Brufus goes first, doesn't matter. Because then if they go second, and Vanquisher goes first, they're destroyed either way. So, all the decks that you say are overlooked are super easy to play around, or just suck, are mediocre going first, and suck going second against the big meta decks. There are things, like, the fact that Mystery Flare won the standard event, I stand to this day, I have not seen any of the matches, I don't think I want to, because all I have to know is, oh, he sacked. Oh, he checked triggers, he went first. Okay, yep, there's nothing to look at anymore. Because Gear Chronicle as a deck literally is the stride mechanic without the restriction that made stride fair. Like, they go first. Okay, I stride now. Wait, don't we vote to be at 3? No, this is standard, buddy. There are no restrictions like that. I would say no. I'd say that the decks you would say are overlooked, they just can't keep up unless they sack. They just can't, unless they high roll, sack, insert things that aren't very skillful here. On a purely skill level, I would say no. But if we're adding luck and we're adding sacking, yes. But you should never be relying on sacking when going into an event.
If you're factoring in luck and sacking, like, you're already doing things wrong. Yeah. Unless it's a deck that can force its luck or its sacking to like be better than average.
OTT we can talk about.
OTT and God Hand are massive examples of that.
Yep.
You can factor sacking and at least slightly above average luck for both of those decks because they can both say, fuck you, I'm getting a trigger this turn, and it will cripple you.
Yes. But every other deck, like, no. I would say if there was no luck or luck involved, and we gave even luck and sacking to both players, the decks that you're talking about would lose 9 out of 10 times. So no, I don't think that any decks in Standard are overlooked, as most of the tops that are subpar are because either they sacked, or because they high rolled, or they got really good matchups, or they dodged their bad matchups, or whatever. But those are all variables in a card game, but purely speaking from a gameplay standpoint, no, I don't think so.
I do just want to quickly throw out, I did actually catch one of that Mystery Flare Dex games, and the luck on both sides was actually pretty average in round 7.
Okay.
But that's the only game of the deck that I saw, so I'm not saying, oh, he didn't sack at all. I'm just saying there's at least one game where he did just kind of get things off.
Okay. Who was his opponent? Actually, here's a good question. Who was his opponent?
I do not recall, but I could check that right now if you'd like me to.
Sure, we'll take a quick 2-minute. I'll stop the timer real quick if you want to get it in. Can you get it in like under? Yeah. Can you get it in like under 30 seconds, maybe?
Yeah, it was last week's standard tournament, right?
Yep, I believe so.
That was the 18th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because his opponent actually does matter in this case.
Yeah, I know. Oh, that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. I actually have it in part of my video from it, so I just have to...
Yeah, you're good. I'm just taking me a little water break.
Yeah, I've already downed my entire water.
Perfect.
He was actually playing against Robyn. I don't remember who went first.
That would also be very important. That's actually very important, who went first.
I don't actually have a way to check on that.
Okay.
And I know that is important, especially in this particular matchup, but,
Well, we can't exactly confirm that, so we're just gonna put that point as mute and move on.
No, I mean, it wasn't really a point that I was making because, I mean, it was already pretty null because it's one game out of several. But I did just want to throw out there that, like...
No, that's fine. That's fine. Resuming timer. Continue. Oh, my dad's dog. You're yelling at the dog again. God bless it.
I'm trying to think. I guess I'm just gonna shoot the same question with premium, just a slightly different spin to it.
Sure.
How often would you say those decks are present in premium? Those decks that the majority of the player base looks at and just sees a deck that's bad or maybe okay at best, but it actually keeps up really well. An example of this, I will say, is that a lot of players, and a surprisingly high amount, at least in the circles that I frequent, don't think Nubatama is a very good deck.
I actually have an exact response to that. I have an exact response to that, and it is kind of a shot at the Vanguard player base, but we're already shooting at him, so let's do this.
If you could deliver that as like part of your answer real quick.
Yeah.
But just like, that's my example of what I mean.
Okay.
You know, just how often do decks like that the general consensus seems to be it's not rogue or meta, when in reality it really is.
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about Nubatama for a second, right? When I ask the average standard player or the average Vanguard player what premium is like, 90% of the time they're gonna say, Tier 0 Neo Nectar Dark Irregular format. Like, it's really not, but sure, I'll just let you have your delusional dreams, buddy.
Can I interrupt you for one thing on that sentence?
Yep, go ahead.
If you're and I know you're just making fun of people, but I know there are also people that say this. If you're complaining about a 2 to 3 deck Tier 0 format, it's not
Tier 0. It's not. Like, no, but like they both say that like it's literally the same with the Yu-Gi-Oh fan base where like anything's released.
I have literally seen people say, like before the most recent ban list, I literally have seen people say Ezel Neo Di Tier 0 format, and I'm like, that's 3 decks.
Yep.
That's not.
That's a triangle format, buddy. I don't know how to tell this to you. It's a triangle format. That's not Tier 0. But anyway, as I was saying, the thing. So I'm gonna. Whoop. There we go. So I don't think in any. Whoop. What did I do? Okay, I'm done. I messed up the timer. We're good now.
You broke it.
Yep, I broke it. But no, people have this really, it's like when Premium first started, like back in Team League of last year, people were actually unironically saying that Gize ruins the format, and I'm like, there's been a single Gize top in all of the Team Leagues. What are you smoking? Like, when people look at Premium, they have this really weird mindset where they only want to think about the most toxic shit, and I don't know why people are more positive about Standard than they are Premium. I legitimately don't get it. Like, I legitimately don't. It's easy, but it's an easy target, but that doesn't.
It's easier to be positive about Standard because it's easier to play worse decks and get away with it.
I don't think so, actually. I think it's because people who are really bad at the game get free wins, and they just don't want to go to a format where they have to get good. But that's a topic for another time. Like, people just straight up don't want to get good, and so instead they're going to complain about things like, it's broken, a Tier 0. Like, Gize, just play around Gize. It's really not that hard to play around Gize. Rush them. They die. They're done. They can't handle that. Stay at 0 damage. That's also a thing, because if you go to 5 on Gize, you still have one more turn to kill them. But if they give you 1 counterblast and you can work with it, work with it. But, like, there are ways to play around these broken decks, and nobody wants to. And that's why they only see these broken decks as Tier 0. So any other deck, like Nubatama, Kagero even, people go, it's not Neo or Dark Irregular, so it's bad, and it sucks. I don't want to take it to an event. I want to... Nobody, like, the people who are good at the game are the ones who bring stuff like Nubatama, Kagero, sometimes even cheese on people with Link Joker every now and then. People who are actually good at the game and understand how to play around the meta are the people that top with these decks. Because they don't complain about the Tier 0 format. They instead just take the deck that they know is going to work against the meta, go into an event, and they play the game. And they deal with the bullshit matchups.
I do both.
It's just how the game works. I really feel like the lack of people realizing how good a certain rogue deck in premium isn't because the deck in premium is bad, unlike in standard where that's the case. But it's instead because people look at the format and they go, it's not like the best deck ever, so it's not gonna beat, because like every best deck in premium is like unbeatable because they don't know how to play around it. They had one bad experience with DI and they never touched it again.
It's not on the watch list and it high rolled, therefore it's tier 0 and nothing else is viable. Herp derp.
But yeah, no, that's exactly why. Premium has that format the problem way bigger than standard does, but that's because standard, sorry, it's a noob magnet. And so all the bad players go to standard, and because they get free wins, they just go, oh my god, this is a more fair format. That's the timer. It's perfect timing. Perfect timing. Did you have another question you wanted to ask? Because I took a lot of time on that answer.
I wanted to actually, after that, I did want to make a quick counterpoint.
Sure,
on
go ahead.
Previous question.
Go ahead.
So I do think that in standard there are much less so than we see in premium, just because there's so much more in premium to explore that can just pop up out of fucking nowhere with, 11 cards from 4 years ago, and suddenly we've broken the meta all over again. So of course it's more likely to happen in premium, but I do think in standard we see occasionally decks that the general player base seems to overlook that are at least solid into the primary portions of the meta.
Okay.
I do think that the biggest reason that it happens in either format is, like you said, a lot of players are average at best. I mean, there's a reason average is considered average,
Yep.
And a lot of the players that tend to get vocal about these sorts of things, they do tend to look at, and I'm not calling you bad when I say this.
Oh no, I'm horrible. I don't have a single top under my belt. I'm horrible at the game.
I have more tops than you.
Continue.
Like I've seen people make the same arguments for standard as for premium right now, that they're both two deck tier 0 formats. Again, that's not what tier 0 is. And secondly, neither format is a tier 0 format. And there are decks in standard, like DI is a good example, that DI actually hasn't been that overlooked in terms of the Vision series in standard, but outside of that, a lot of people tend to just ignore it.
Okay.
And I think it's definitely worth a second look, because the deck, if it goes first, it can definitely build up a wall, and you're not that hurt by not having that crit if you have the first ride. Either it's not having the grade 3s in soul or not having any rear guards to retire, because you're still building up hand and soul, and that gets you to your NLK with the opponent's less set up for it.
Okay.
So I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining why I think that DI is a good example of this kind of deck, but
I mean, I can give another example if you want. Like, if you want to name a deck that you think people overlook in standard.
I guess we're just gonna spitball about one more deck.
Sure.
How do you feel about Hyuga in standard right now?
I actually have no comment, just straight up, because like I don't know how the deck functions without Shirayuki. I don't think it can, because like it has a really good rush, but then like where the hell did its defensive options go? Like they're just gone. They don't have a defensive option anymore. Like without Shirayuki, they have one Shirayuki, great, but like they have no defensive options anymore. And so if they go second, they can board clear, but they're more likely to get just pummeled into the ground by Vanquisher and Revan.
So in testing,
okay,
Hyuga has actually done decently with a slightly modified list to account for, the 3 missing Shirayukis.
Yep.
It definitely took a hit. That's what hits tend to try and do. But I do think that a lot of people are blowing the hit out of proportion. And I think it is. It's pretty much what you said. A lot of people look at Shirayuki being at 1 and think, where did the deck's defense go? Shirayuki is not the deck's entire defense. You still have that grade 3 that's going to be drawing you cards. You still have your deck thinning, although you are burning through some counterblast for it. And honestly, you have, if all else fails, a strategy that says, yeah, the best defense is a good offense. Which isn't the best thing but that can save you sometimes.
Okay.
And that one Shirayuki is still recyclable and searchable-ish, so it's not totally dead in the water.
Okay.
I don't think that's another standard deck that's under the radar right now.
So then moving back on to my question, I'm going to start my timer for me.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, you're good. I'm going to start my timer for me. So then these questions I'm going to start asking are going to be a little more personal about your feelings towards certain things and your definition of certain words.
Okay.
So.
Oh boy, I'm gonna get skewered for these questions, aren't I?
Yes, you are.
That's fine. I've probably been skewered for my answers to all of them already.
Yep. So starting off, you said last night in our Discord server that you feel like the format right now is balanced. I jokingly said that, like, oh my gosh, is Ali saying that the format is fair and balanced? And then you answered that question seriously. I'm like, oh shit, we're doing this. But your answer was it's balanced but unhealthy. And I think
no.
90.
You said diverse.
Diverse, right? But diverse and unhealthy, which 90% of people on this planet.
90% of the card game community
and
not even just TCGs. I'm talking fucking Uno, poker.
But like those people, 90% of them, including pro players. If I haven't asked them, but if I asked them, I would bet money that they would say
that they will not have the same definition that I do.
That your definition, that what you said just there was contradictory and wrong. So clarify what you mean by that.
I'm trying to think of the best way to word this.
Okay.
So a diverse meta is pretty self-explanatory. It just means that there are it really depends on like a lot of factors. There's not a solid number I could say this many or more relevant decks is a diverse meta, but just enough decks that you're not going to just be running into the same things even if you're at the top tables.
Let's agree on maybe 6. You want to say 6? We'll just agree on 6.
5?
5? That works too.
I think 5 is a fair cap for
5 is a fair cap for diverse.
For a diverse format.
Right. Yep, we'll just say 5.
Okay. So, for the sake of example, 5 or more decks that are all considered viable with at least 2 of those being contender for best deck in format.
Okay.
Or at least 2 of those countering the uncontested best deck.
Okay.
In my opinion. Obviously, that's layers to make it better, not necessarily required, but that's usually what you'll see if it's, diverse enough.
Mm-hmm.
I do not consider the meta to be healthy just because you see those 5 decks and you see those things countering each other directly, because you can see a meta of 5 decks that a majority of the player base is not going to enjoy playing against. You can see diverse metas that, for the sake of example, I know there are technically ways to play around most of these things. I know that obviously some people have fun in different matchups. For the sake of example, Mega Colony, Dark Irregulars, Riviere, Ezel, and Chaos. If those 5 decks were the best 5 decks in the format, sure, you could consider that diverse by the rules we set in place, but I would consider that to be an extremely toxic and anti-fun meta. Obviously, that's not the meta we're in right now, but I consider a meta toxic if at least half of the decks that are consistently performing are ones that are consistently if you go into a circle of the game, you're going to see people probably complaining about X, Y, and Z decks.
I mean, I don't think that's a fair comparison because people complain about literally anything.
Okay, no, but I don't mean literally everyone complaining. I mean ones you're going to see people consistently like coming to the same conclusions of what's wrong with these decks.
Okay.
And why, they're too good or too anti-fun.
Okay.
I don't personally consider Neos to be a toxic deck, but they're a good example of one that you could easily consider to be an unhealthy deck.
All right.
A lot of people will constantly say, okay, the general consensus is that most people want Katrina and or Gladiolus to be gone. Most people agree that they're toxic / anti-fun because they're too easy to play, as there's not much you can do playing around them. With DI, it's the entire NLK combo. Pretty much everyone agrees that dislikes that matchup. That's what's wrong with DI. And I know Chaos isn't the most meta thing, but I always fall back on it as my example of toxic does not equal broken. Chaos just yeets your entire hand on board as locked and tells you to go fuck yourself if you couldn't kill it fast enough, which, in fairness, could partially be on you, but in fairness, could also be 0% on you, depending on how that game went.
Okay, so then what I'll say to that is the 5 decks you just did. Could you rename those decks for me? The 5 decks that you said if they were the meta, the format would be unhealthy.
So the 5 decks that I used as an example were Dark Irregulars in their current state. Ezel, I was more referring to before the Wonder Ezel ban.
Okay.
Just to clarify on that.
Yep.
Riviere. Shit, now I'm forgetting. Chaos, Ezel, Riviere, Dark Irregulars, and my stupidity.
Let's just say, I think you said Mega Colony.
I did say Mega Colony.
Yep.
Thank you.
So,
because they're not good, so I forget.
Right. So let's talk about right now. I don't know if have you ever played Riviere versus Ezel? Ever?
I want to say I've actually only played that personally once or twice.
Okay. Well, in my testing, because I actually went on a win streak with Riviere because I thought the deck was broken and funny. That is one of the most fun matchups in existence. Because if one person does their high roll stride, their high roll go to 3 thing, the other person goes, oh, did you give me first stride? And then horrible shit happens. The point I'm trying to make is that Chaos, Ezel counters Riviere and Chaos. Riviere counters Mega Colony and to some extent, all those decks you just mentioned, actually I'd consider that to be a very fun and fair format. Unironically, because you have 2 control decks, a combo deck, an aggro deck, and a combo aggro deck. I consider Riviere to be combo aggro, considering on how they play, and how they're more piece reliant than say Golds are.
I play Riviere stall,
but no, I'd say you have that is a extremely you named a format that I would unironically love to play in. That sounds like an amazing format.
The more I think about it, so the more I think about it, as much as I do consider those to be among some of the worst decks to play against for me, I think it could be interesting to see a format like that. I hope we don't, just in case. But
that's actually incredibly fun.
Those five decks together, just because specifically of how they function, that might not have been the best example, but you know what I was going for with it.
I mean, but every format that we've had so far, if there's a toxic deck in there, there is a meta counter to it 90% of the time, and then there's a counter to that 90% of the time, but then the toxic deck counters that counter. It's actually very fair and, toxic, whatever, but I would say that it's balanced. Premium for 90% of its life cycle. 90% of its life cycle. If we consider having 3 decks or more that counter each other in some way, that have fun matchups with each other in some way, I'd say 90% of the time, Premium has been a very fun and balanced format. If that's the definition we're going off of, I will not say if I found Premium, because my definition of fun is different. I find that completely different.
I mean, fun is totally subjective.
Yeah, but if that's the definition we're going by, and that's the definition you want to use, then every format in Premium so far has been fair and balanced. Every single one. There's not been a single format where shit was going wrong the way that you said it would be. Not one.
Okay, but okay, so I'm trying to think of how to better explain this, because obviously those 5 decks aren't 5 decks that I think, they are 5 decks that I think can be extremely unfun to play against. 2 of those decks are not terrible, but they just kind of die to the entire meta. and 3 of them are in the meta.
Well, Ezel not so much anymore, but you know.
I think Ezel's a little bit sleeper right now. Actually, it's not that bad. But
It's
also not as ridiculously anti-fun.
It's got all the issues that a standard deck has, which I don't like. But that's a story for another time.
I think the thing with unhealthy decks is that, like, I know this is going to sound like a really weird comparison, and don't take this as me trying to be like, I've got an excuse, so I'm right. Like, I know that I'm not entirely correct in anything that I've said today, because you're never going to be 100% correct. All of this is at least partially subjective.
Okay.
But what I will say is that there are people who unironically enjoyed 2018 Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm not saying that that's a majority of the player base, but
I
you're
would
familiar
say
with what the game was like in
I
that
would
year,
say
correct?
I would say everybody enjoyed that format, ironically or unironically. Ironically, I adored that format.
Everyone loved it. Ironically, it was just how many FTKs can I make today?
I wonder how I can break Metal Fish.
How can we break Firewall Dragon?
Firewall Dragon's already got several broken bones. What's another one, huh?
But, like, I mean, do you understand the comparison that I'm drawing?
Yes.
In that,
Yes.
There are going to be people that don't find the same things unhealthy or unfun. No matter how much you can justify what is and isn't fun and healthy in a meta, someone else could have different opinions on that.
I actually am going somewhere with this objectively. I am actually going somewhere with this. I'm actually going somewhere with this. So
no, that's fine. I just wanted to throw that out there just as a kind of, like,
in standard. This is you can't see it, but I'm rubbing my hands together.
Yeah, no, I can hear it.
Yep. In standard, would you say that it's worse because 90% of the time you legitimately, if you go second, cannot do anything? Just straight up.
Good players or average players?
Well, let's go with average because that's the standard fan base. Premium, sorry to generalize, but premium is where all the experienced players go. Premium is where all the good players go 90% of the time. And standard is kind of just where all the
standard is where everyone goes, and premium is where the people that like really want to get better go.
Like actually are good at the game.
Unless you specifically want to get better at standard, which
I don't know why.
Where I sit, because I prefer standard personally.
All right, so actually,
that's irrelevant.
That is part of this debate. That is actually very relevant.
I know, but I want to answer the question at hand first.
Sure.
So, for the average player, standard is a far worse offender.
Yep.
If you're just I actually find it really weird because, like, I know premium definitely has the higher skill floor, but there are easier and casual premium decks that these people can pick up and play, especially, you know, when you're looking at a lot of standard plus options. And it's like, it actually baffles me how some players complain about ridiculous imbalances that literally aren't even real. He's like, in premium, and then turn around and say, you know, yeah, no, going first isn't too strong in standard. Like, these are people that aren't making the plays that let you go second into Vanquisher with DI and have a fighting chance. And granted, that's still partially luck-based, but since we keep reverting back to that example for standard,
right,
like, Dark Irregulars is one of the higher-end skill decks in standard, and I will say that when you get to, like, the not really comparing directly to the meta, but it definitely, like, it's one of those decks that if you play it, you're actually going to be able to take a good chunk of premium, and if you're playing it well, you're going to be able to take a good chunk of premium decks and at least learn quickly, if not instantly. And then from those, you can build your way up to the harder decks that are also relevant. So, but like, for the higher end standard players, I would say that standard isn't as bad with that as it seems to be made out to be. I'd say that it's
So, but you said that Toxic is something that's legitimately unfun to play against and that you can't do anything about. Like, Mega Colony and Chaos don't let you play the game. You describe those as toxic, right? You describe those as unhealthy. Okay. Yes. So then if I'm going second in Standard and I'm going to lose...
If you're going second and that going second is an auto-lose because Robyn says fuck you...
But 90% of them are auto-loses if you go second. That's the thing. Is that 90% of them are. So then that just means, by definition that we're using here, that Standard is toxic as a format.
Okay. So, here's the thing. Do you mind if I ask you a question real quick?
Go ahead.
Just to get a ground
the timer's been up. We've been finishing this last question, so go ahead and ask a question.
Okay. I don't want to make wild assumptions. How much and how in-depth do you play Standard? This is very important to what I'm about to say.
Okay, nope, that's a completely fair question. I started playing Standard, and I've been playing Standard for a while, ever since the Robyn set dropped in Japan, not in the United States. So
ever since we've had access to testing.
Yes, so ever since we've had access to testing with Robyn, I've been playing Robyn on stream. I've been playing Robyn in Standard. I've been playing Vanquisher in Standard. I've even experimented a wee little bit with Altmael in Standard. I've been playing with all of the best decks, and I've even dipped my toes in Valk. I've been playing for a while because originally I was going to be on a Standard team with two very good and very experienced players. So I wanted to, be playing my best at the top of my game, making the optimal choices, not messing up with my deck, and then the event got canceled, and I've still been playing... I was legitimately heartbroken, but that's another point. Like, I have been testing Standard and looking at Standard and experimenting with Standard for a while. I've been kind of dicking around on Cardfight area since then. I haven't been streaming it, but that's just because sometimes there's just not a good time to stream because not everybody's up and awake to watch it. So I haven't streamed in a while, also because of uni.
And also, sometimes you want to keep those spicy secrets, although that's more of a premium thing than a Standard thing.
I'm also in college, so I have finals weeks. It's art school. Art school gives you final weeks, not final week. So recently I haven't had a lot of time to play Standard, but I certainly have gone in depth with the best decks, and I've played with some of the lower tier decks, and all the things I'm saying so far, observations from my gameplay.
Okay. So more than I had actually thought in recent history then. I knew that you picked it up, really picked up Standard when the Robyn set dropped. I knew you were really into that. I will say one thing. It sounds like you play Robyn quite a bit.
Robyn was the deck I was going to bring, so that was the deck I tested the most with, but after the event was canceled, I played around with other Standard decks.
Okay.
So from when Robyn was released to when the event was canceled, that was when I played Robyn the most. And then after that, I kind of dropped Robyn. I'm like, well, there's no point in testing Robyn anymore, but I had a little fun in Standard, so let's try some other decks. But that's because the format for Premium was so dog shit at the time. It was bad. So I was like, I will completely admit, we have had bad periods in Premium where I just stopped playing because I'm waiting for the meta to get...
We've had shit periods in Standard.
No, but I'm waiting for Premium Collection. Once Premium Collection 2 comes out, I'm going right back into the format. Because that set is going to fix a lot of the problems I have with the format at this current time.
That's probably going to fix a lot of problems I have with Premium. Are you fucking kidding me?
No, that set is legitimately unlike Premium Collection. This is what Premium Collection 1 should have been. This is amazing.
Premium Collection 1 was power creep the set. Premium Collection 2 is game health.
We're gonna fix that. We're gonna fix that real quick. But no, once that comes out, I'll get back into it. So to answer your question, no, I've only been playing Robyn since it released and the event got canceled. Otherwise, I've been playing Vanquisher, Altmael, Valk. I even dipped my toes in Mordred. So
okay,
I think I played one or two games with Mordred, and then I dropped it because I'm like, this sucks.
Is that pretty much the bulk of what you played? But this isn't important for what I'm going to say.
Yes, that is pretty much the bulk of what I have played 1 or 2 games with random bullcrap.
Various scattered. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I will say is that, first off, playing with or against Robyn, as we've discussed, Robyn is by far the worst offender in either format of some of the biggest issues I have, and I will fully admit that.
Okay.
So testing with and against Robyn will definitely, at least, I feel like it will give you an at least somewhat skewed, if you can't separate Robyn and what it is from how the rest of the format functions.
I mean, no, it's broken. It's legitimately the only reason I was playing it was because the other two.
So I think that Vanquisher is the better deck than Revan, but Revan has something Vanquisher doesn't, and that's go first win.
But no, like Revan, I was literally only playing it because the other two members were playing Vanquisher and Claret Sword respectively, and I'm like, oh no, we gotta round this out with the Tree Dragon's Vanity. Come on, we gotta round this out, man.
Yep, pretty much.
So yeah, but there you go. Continue your point. Let me. I want to see where you're going with this.
Yeah. So like, there are definitely a lot of things that I feel like you may have overlooked in certain matchups. You may have overlooked. And
like
I guess
what?
this kind of relates back to my earlier point. Well, like I mentioned earlier, Hyuga is not dead at the moment. It does pretty well into Vanquisher. If you go first, you can clap Revan okay most of the time.
Okay.
Riviere, I already mentioned DI. Valkyrion's consistent enough that it can actually do well into surprise, surprise, most of the meta that's not Revan.
Okay.
Shadows are not so much overlooked right now, but they're also a deck that neither side is too hurt by Shadows going first or second, unless things go stupidly well for the Claret player.
Okay.
So I'm trying to gather my thoughts before they leave.
You're fine. So you're saying that I overlooked maybe a few things just because I haven't played as much. Your point is?
Revan is not the way everything else is. And even Vanquisher is not the way everything else is, especially as we move forward and we see decks that can start keeping up with these decks.
I mean, no, but it's not. But at the current moment, those are the two decks that matter, and your deck is basically, can I beat them or am I them?
Yes. But Vanquisher is much less of a go first win deck than Revan. Vanquisher is a deck that you're going to have an easier time with a lot of decks going second into, as long as your decks don't just be like, well, I went second into literally anything, guess I'll die now.
Mm-hmm.
Which, there are a lot of those, and most of them suck. Whereas Revan, Revan is, if you wanted to, I'm not saying that using Revan as an example is making excuses, but if you wanted to make excuses, if you wanted to have a standard equivalent of the Gizeh thing, yeah, just complain about Revan. It's fine.
Okay, but
difference being Gizeh's not tier 1, but you understand the comparison.
No, yeah, I understand the comparison, but at the same time, though, I would actually argue, and here's my point. I'd argue that since Excel 2 came out, Standard has been Revans and Vanquishers over and over and over again in a figurative way, not literally. Like, we always will have a Revan and a Vanquisher.
Hyuga is literally Vanquisher. What are you talking about?
Yeah, okay. So
Riviere is literally Revan. They both start with R. Both have a V in them.
So hold on. So you start. No, you're fine. So we going from Excel 2's creation, which is the Heroic Evolution and onward.
Yes.
Once we get
the
Phantasmal Steed, we have Murakumo tier 1 deck. No other contenders at the current moment. Maybe Revan. Sorry. Maybe Mordred. Mordred's pretty good. DI's got some tops here and there. Pale Moon is busted. Pale Moon's busted, as all people believe. But what am I noticing here? Oh, wait. These are both Excel decks that, when they go first, are great. The only difference is that Hyuga annihilates you going... So I actually say Hyuga is more toxic than Revan and Vanquisher when it had Shirayuki. So, like... It's just been that repeatedly. You got the same two Excel decks specifically on the top, curb stomping the rest of the meta, and you go second against them, you die. And if you go second against them, they're probably still gonna kill you if you're not playing one of those two decks. So it's been that way since Excel 2's creation, and Standard, unlike Premium, does not have an incentive for going second, and does not have the skillful play that requires you to play around what your opponent's doing. There are no counters to anything in Standard other than luck and your deck. There are no in-game counters. Barely. There might be, but barely any in-game counters. Barely.
As someone who defends standard quite a bit, as I've done in this video, yeah, no, the best you're gonna get mid game is damage denying into CB heavy decks.
But that's it. But that's barely a thing.
That's basically all you're doing.
But that's basically barely a thing.
And
this,
there's not a lot of CB heavy standard decks that don't have counter charge to get that back.
Right.
So it's like,
and this has been this way since Excel's 2's creation. You could even argue it's been that way beforehand. So, because going first, as you said much earlier, I told you this was all going to come together and build up and have a big conclusion at the end. You've basically said, okay, so going first has always been good. Once we go into year 2, everything becomes top 2 decks that are Excel decks that go first, and going first is literally amazing. There's barely any counterplay. You can play a low tier deck, but you have to go first and or sack. And yet you find standard to be the superior format. And I'm very curious as to why. This is the part where we're done asking questions at this point. Like, I've turned the timer off completely.
This is where we start. The part where this is closing statements.
I have wrapped up.
A long ass time.
Oh no, it's gonna be long. No, we're gonna be here for a while. I have wrapped together all the things I've asked you and all the things you've asked me, and the conclusion I'm coming to is we've both agreed that premium as a format, using objective definitions, objective data, and previous history with both formats, is overall, using your definition, healthier, because even if there are 2 decks like Chaos Omega Colony and Premium, overall, the whole going first issue in Standard is worse than those 2 decks combined. So it's actually, by your definition, not mine, a worse format that is more unhealthy than Premium's 2 Cancer decks. And yet you still support this format, and I have yet to hear why.
My first response is going to be that the 2 decks you're using, and I'm sure you don't specifically mean this, but I just want to explain this for viewers' sake.
Sure.
You know, Gridora and Chaos are not the only 2 things. They are, I have stated already, but they are the 2 that I don't actually usually consider when I'm thinking about this stuff for the purpose of debates. I usually look to DI and Riviere, and not so much Ezel at this point, but
okay.
Previously, you know.
We can both agree that Ezel was in fact basically if they went first and they had the nut, you were losing.
Ezel was standard Revan on steroids.
Yeah. But Riviere, I'm actually going to fight against that because I think that deck's completely fair because it's counterplay. You can actually counterplay Riviere.
Okay. So,
if you can, in my definition, if you can counter it, it's not unhealthy. Because then
how do you counter Riviere?
It's not going to make them lose the game instantly, but if they can't do the superior ride, then they're in less of a optimal situation. Their deck literally cannot do what their deck was built to do.
I am assuming you know what Selena does.
I believe I do, but let's make sure I do, and let's check to make sure we're both on the same page.
Selena is the one that is able to jump you from grade 1 to 2. She does not require Counterblast. And in addition to that, she bounces and calls.
All right, here we go. I actually had this argument earlier, and I actually had this argument earlier into why that's not a problem. Okay, so you mean to tell me you're going first, right? You're going first. You as a player, reminding you, by the way, that Riviere at this time has the once per turn restriction.
Yes.
Okay. So
yes.
May I remind you you're going to tell me that you're going first as a Riviere player. Okay? You're going first. You open your Selena, and you go to grade 2 while I'm on grade 0. It's my turn. I go to grade 1. I swing in. Oh wait, I didn't give you any damage. Look at that. I can attack you and not give you damage, and also plus. Then what happens is it's your turn, you go to 3, you ride Riviere, and you can, as a matter of fact, if you have your pieces, which, by the way, Riviere is more piece-reliant than Ezel, and so they're going to sack you less often, because with Ezel, it was 1 card. Riviere, you need like 3 or 4. So you go into that, you go into 3, you attack my grade 1, and I go, fuck. I take some hits, I actually might have a 15k in my hand. You're not on stride, so I can guard you pretty easily unless you go force 1. But why would you go force 1 in Riviere, smiley face? And if you did, then I'm taking less damage, and I'm not going to die as easily. So let's, for sake of argument, you say force 1 is more optimal. Can we agree that the Riviere player went on force 1?
Wait, I'm sorry. You cut out for a moment.
Sure.
Can
You
we
say Riviera is more optimal with Force 1, so for the sake of argument, the Riviera player went Force 1. Okay?
Okay.
Cool. You're on Force 1, you attack me, 15k shield can stop some attacks, I take a damage or 2, I am now at 2 damage. I go to grade 2.
I just want to back this up.
Sure.
And I know we're kind of getting into territory of asking for more pieces, but you're looking at anywhere from 2 to 5 attacks, depending on what Riviera's hand is. 2 is your bare minimum, assuming 2 Vanguard swings.
They do have to go -1 in order to use Selena's ability.
Yes.
But that means that they're going to have less Ezel was broken.
A second
because
Selena with a Riviera reride is 3 extra attacks.
Okay, that's a lot to ask for. That's very sacky, my friend. That's very sacky.
It's actually only asking you to see 3 cards.
By turn 2, when you took a card out of your hand. Ezel, at the very least, if they saw the 1 card, they went off. If they saw the 1 Bowman, they were set.
I'm not saying Riviera's as bad as Ezel was.
But no, what I'm saying that Riviera isn't even as bad, even if it isn't even close to toxic, because it's way more luck dependent. It cannot plus in any capacity without very specific setup, which is very easy to play around, by the way. And if you do the Selena play and you don't have the Riviera in hand, then like. And you were planning on going to Trawl? Like, if you're a bad Riviera player, then oops. With Ezel, there was no skill involved. With Riviera, my opponent had to at least be using 3 of their brain cells. I don't even think that's close to toxic. I can still play around Riviera. I only lost to Riviera in an event I went to recently because I was playing Grand Blue Gize for the memes. And that's super easy to counter with any given rush deck. So I don't think Riviera is as bad as you're saying it is, even if we're listing all these toxic decks. The only 2 I would consider 3, excuse me. The only one I would consider to have no counterplay is DI. Chaos has counterplay, even though it doesn't always work, it still has counterplay. And Mega Colony is so vulnerable, I won't begin to dignify it with the explanation. So, going off of your definition of toxic, Standard is worse. Because every deck is, every good deck, excuse me. I should not say every deck because that's not true. Every good deck...
Risers!
Every good deck is, I go first, I win 90% of the time, and there's nothing you can do about it to stop it, play around it, or go against it. So then I'm going to ask you, and we're not going to go, no more tangents, I want to know legitimately, why do you defend Standard over Premium when we've gone through all this information, and so far, I've been hearing that you think Standard at this current moment, and for a while as well, is worse than Premium because of the arguments we've been throwing at each other. So why do you defend the format then? This is the meat of the argument here.
A lot of the good Standard decks, again, Robyn aside, and I know that is definitely a thing against the format, that I have to put one of the top 2 decks aside to say this, but Robyn aside, most of the good decks can afford going second into each other without getting sacked. Because if you get sacked, that can just cripple anything, anytime, anywhere.
But the problem is that sacking is far worse, and as a result, by definition, if you can't do anything about those sacks, it's toxic.
If you get sacked in the early game in Premium, there is not a whole lot of decks can do that Standard decks could not also do in response.
I disagree. The only sacking I can think of in the early game for total encompassing is I make it 1 to pass and you get a critical trigger. And why would you... I've always said this to every player. Never make it 1 to pass or the first 3 turns of the game unless you have to.
Never 1 to pass early game. Please.
Never do that. But
don't do that.
But that's the only instance of real sacking for over-encompassing all decks in the format that I can think of. Unless you want individual examples, and even then, they're not as bad as Standard.
And now the dogs are starting.
No, it's fine. You're fine. But I really want to know why it is you defend the format, and whatever response you throw at me, I am going to fight it. Because that's why we're here.
That is indeed the point of a debate video, yes. I'm trying to think of how to word this without causing further confusion and or tangent.
Okay.
The simplest way I can put it is like, I feel like it's not as bad as it's being made out to be right now.
Okay.
The entire thing of going second being, it's a disadvantage most of the time, but it's far from an auto loss in most of the matchups you're going to be playing at a tournament. And
for the sake of argument, 90% of your matchups are Revan and Vanquisher. Because that's what it would. If we saw Team League, you would see a Revan and a Vanquisher on every team. You would. There's just no if and or buts about it.
Very likely, yes.
So let's say this is a regular event. There are no teams. It's a regular event. It's a highly competitive event, by the way. People are mostly bringing Revan or Vanquisher. And you go second every game. Or most games. How do your matches turn out? You played your best. You did the best you could. How do your matches turn out?
It depends what you're playing and how much Revan you see.
All right, fine. What did you take to the event? What did you play at the event? You can name a deck. You can name any deck you want. What did you take? What did you take to the event?
Current English or Japanese format?
Current English.
This does matter.
Current English.
Mm-hmm.
So All Mile, Chronojet, and Asha are not legal at this moment.
Yeah, that's the important thing, because I was going to say All Mile if you let me do JP. But, honestly, there's plenty of things that I would be willing to take into that and have a chance. Just because of the fear of Vanquisher, I think Hyuga's automatically out, but Riviere, DI, and Melody are three things I could definitely see being things I would take to an event right now.
So you know what we can do? I can get my dice out, and we can roll to determine what you're taking to this event.
Okay.
And then I have an argument to go from here.
Okay.
So 1-2 Riviere, 3-4 DI, 5-6 Melody. Okay?
Sure.
It was a 1, so you're taking Riviere to this event. And you go second most of your games. And you see... So let's say there are 8 rounds. Does that sound fair?
Okay.
8 rounds, okay. Half of your games, 4 of those rounds, you go second. And 2 of those rounds, you see Revan. What does your win-loss record look like? So let's say it's a 50-50 split. You see some Vanquisher, and you go first for half of those games. So 4 Vanquisher, 2 times you go first, 2 times you go second, and 4 Revan, 2 times you go first, 2 times you go second. A perfectly even mathematical split. The average, the absolute average, if we took the going first, going second ratios of everybody in the room, this is what it would look like. So what does your record look like?
At absolute best, 6-2, because you went second into Revan twice.
Okay. But on average, what would you say? So let's completely disregard the going second against Revan games. Okay? And you can win those because they missed the G assist, which, by the way, missing G assist, very skillful maneuver, very skillful way to beat your opponent. But those 2 games don't matter because you lost against them. Let's talk about the times you went first against Revan, first against Vanquisher, and second against Vanquisher. What happened during those games? Going first against Revan and Vanquisher, what happened? Did you win?
Either you saw your pieces or you didn't.
I mean, not to get sarcastic here, but that definitely...
I never said standard was a hard form.
That definitely sounds like a very skillful way to play against your opponent. And that doesn't sound toxic at all. Your opponent is going to feel very bad, like they're being cheated out of wins.
But it's not like you're looking at seeing a full 5-board piece. You're looking at seeing a few pieces.
Right, but that's still...
that you have to see.
But it still comes down to, did you draw your pieces? And if you did, you win. There's no way to play around it. Your opponent is going to walk out of that room thinking, wow, that was toxic. You may have won the game, but your opponent didn't because they got cheated out of a win by RNG. And that's 90% of standard games from what we've been talking about so far. So then again, by the definition of toxic, standard's a toxic format. Because there was nothing your opponent could have done. You saw your pieces. They went second. They lose. They can't counterplay you. They could try and damage starve you. But what's that realistically going to do? Riviere doesn't need counterblast. Well, to draw it does, but who cares about that? You can just rush them with easy. So again, they've been cheated out of wins. Because they simply went second and you saw your pieces. Both of which are variables completely out of their control. So again, I ask you, why do you prefer, and if it's for ironic reasons, that's fine, you can say that. Like, I'm not going to judge anybody for liking standard ironically, but like, at this point, I really only see for ironic entertainment as the only logical answer. Unless you have one in which I'm very willing to hear it. It doesn't even have to be super logical. It just has to follow the things we've stated so far.
I mean, okay. If we're going with, like, the completely objective, not looking for, like... subjective. If we're going for the completely subjective, not looking at objective logic, why do I prefer standard? Because I have more fun with it?
There you go!
Because I don't go... No. Okay, so at the end of the day, most people are going to prefer the format they prefer because they have more fun with it.
Yep.
If you want the simplest answer, I have more fun in standard, especially at tournaments.
Okay.
Part of the reason is that in standard, I'm not worried my opponent's going to flip up X deck that I don't want to be playing against today. My opponent's going to flip up X toxic thing, toxic in my opinion.
Okay.
I'm not going into a standard event thinking I'm probably going to, barely get to play the game half of my games today. I go into a standard event thinking, we're bringing what we're bringing. Gonna play the best we can. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't.
So would you say you enjoy this format the same way, perhaps, that I would have enjoyed the 2018 Yu-Gi-Oh! Format, in that it's not exactly skill-intensive, depends on who goes first, there are counters, but they're very few and far between, and I'm going to take the FTK I want to take to YCS, and we're just going to have a good old time, not worry about winning games, just have some fun. Would you say that is similar to how you feel about standard? Just minus the FTK part and replace it with actual gameplay.
No, I know. But like in that sense, I would say pretty much, yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's basically
that's
basically the bottom of where we're getting at. Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect. That's literally that's the exact answer to my question. So then the question becomes, why? So we've gotten that out of the way. You prefer standard because it's more fun. That's fine. But using the definitions and points that we've both brought up in this whole debate, would you say, objectively, taking all personal bias aside, Premium is probably the better format as a card game, as a competitive card game where you're supposed to be using your brain?
That is a very difficult question, actually.
Fantastic. I'd like to hear what you have to say then.
As far as skill floor, skill ceiling, needing to actually use your fucking brain for once,
yep.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But we have seen, and in my opinion are currently seeing, a lot of metas where a lot of players, and I don't just mean, like, when I say this, I don't mean average players. I mean, like, people that are, consistently, maybe not consistently topping, but that are consistently doing, like, well into players that are considered really well by a lot of people in X community.
Okay.
We've had a lot of metas where people are just like, this isn't fun, I'm just going to wait for the next format and then start playing premium again. At its best, and I guess this is a good way to just kind of close off my thoughts on this as a whole.
Sure.
At its best, premium will always be the best way to play Vanguard. And at its worst, I may go back to 2018 Yu-Gi-Oh! but no, seriously, like, at its best, and I think this is part of why I criticize premium as much as I do as well, because I love this game, and I want to see, so much more. It's the same reason you criticize anything you love, because you want to see more, because you know that more can come from it.
Yep.
At its best, premium is damn near perfect Vanguard.
Awesome.
Perfect competitive. And at its best, standard is damn near perfect casual, in my opinion.
That's actually that's literally exactly what I wanted to hear from you. That's perfect. That is a perfect way to summarize it.
And just to clarify, not that standard is 0% competitive, 0% skill, and, premium has no casual, but the general way to... that's the best way to break them up.
Okay, perfect. I think I've said everything I need to say. I think we've reached a general consensus, gotten all our points out. Ali, thank you for coming.
The thing is, I don't think either of our opinions changed on much of anything this video.
No, but the point was just to have the debate never has to end with one side.
No, debate does not have to end with one side with one side conforming.
Right.
And the dogs want the video to end.
Well, I mean, perfect timing. Thank you so much for coming on this. As promised.
Or if you're watching this on my channel, thanks.
Of course,
for coming
yes.
to my
Please. Actually, I'll be leaving Ali's channel.
We'll be leaving links to each other's channels in the description, so go ahead and
check
those
sub
out.
to the other. But
my content's not Vanguard exclusively. But
no. But yep. Thank you so. As promised, this video will be completely unedited audio. I have been moving in front of my camera this whole time, but there are plenty of me scratching my ass and picking my ears, so I'm not gonna show that to anybody. So,
and I'm ugly.
I don't know. But yeah, that's the end of the video there.
This call for almost 2 hours.
Yep, no, we're about 1 minute and 30 minutes in, so perfect time to cut off the video. Thank you so much for coming. Disclaimers in the description if you need to hear anything. Channels to each other's description. Links to each other's channels in the description as well. And premium chat. What's your channel name? Your channel name is
ThinkingEmoji106.
ThinkingEmoji106 and Premium Chad finished here. Signing out.